Sarah Hotchkiss. I own Catalyst Wellness Coaching downtown. I do nutrition and certified licensed in mental health and nutrition. So I kind of do a little bit of both. Working with people, primarily women, some men, some teens, but I would say 70% of people who I'm working with is 40 plus women with usually chronic health issues. A lot of autoimmune, a lot of GI stuff, some of this perimenopause stuff. And I think just sometimes by the time you hit a certain age, things that you used to do that used to work for you for whatever you were feeling don't work anymore all of a sudden. So then you don't know what to do. Like all of a sudden you have headaches, you can't sleep, the weight gain around the middle in particular. Um, and so how you used to eat and what you used to do just might need to be different. You got to figure out kind of what works for your body. I also work part-time on the south side at the doctor's office, which is a cash pay premium care clinic. So I do some nutrition and some just kind of strict mental health there. As a practitioner, I'm probably different in such that when someone comes to me with like anxiety or depression, I'm looking through all their labs and we're doing nutrition and we're doing all of that stuff too, because in my mind, it's all really connected and the symptoms are connected. In fact, we'll talk about progesterone a chunk here. But when I work with women who sometimes present with anxiety, before we jump to like Lexapro or meds or any of that other stuff, we look at cortisol. I might do a neural profile to look at GABA, which is a neurotransmitter that if you have anxiety, you're low on. And what else can cause anxiety, especially into your 40s and 50s, is low progesterone. So progesterone is that calming hormone that helps you sleep and helps you just like chill out. And so sometimes all we need to do is balance hormones and maybe do a little progesterone and then you feel great. And then we don't need to do SSRIs or any of that stuff. Not that you can't, but like that's just not where I start. Same with my clients that are presenting primarily for nutrition. We're digging into the mental health piece a little bit too, because some people have had chronic health and chronic pain stuff, fibromyalgia, RA, celiac, Crohn's, colitis, that they've been dealing with this stuff up and down their whole life. And that can do a number on you after a while. It can be very depressing during those times when it's flaring and that you're not feeling good. I also work with people a lot on like emotional eating, food anxiety, some old, even buried like child abuse stuff and like soothing with food, kids witnessing domestic violence, and then mom gives them ice cream to feel better after, and like that adds up after a while too. So in my mind, like the nutrition and the mental health stuff are really intertwined here, and so today we'll focus on just kind of perimenopause, and so I'm going to talk about pretty high level here because there's a lot, but high level kind of the big hormones, and that'll be progesterone, estrogen, a little bit on DHEA, which feeds testosterone, and then we're absolutely going to talk about testosterone. A lot of times when you go to talks or you talk to people about like women's hormones, we don't talk about testosterone, and that one's huge too, because if that one takes a dive, you feel like crap too. Men too, but we don't think about it as women too. We don't need as much testosterone as guys, but we need, a chunk. So just a couple terms. Most of you guys probably know some of this, but couple terms. So FSH is follicle stimulating hormone. So that's one of the ones that you could potentially get measured. That stimulates the growth of your eggs and your ovaries. And then estrogen, luteinizing hormone, LH, you might see that like on a hormone panel. That triggers the release of the egg from the ovary. So I've had ovarian cysts the last few years now too, which I didn't really have too much before, but that's because my LH is getting higher and I'm basically like producing eggs and then they're just hanging out there, and so that can cause ovarian torsion and like some other, you probably hear women talk about like ovarian cysts all the time, and they can be these tiny little things and I don't know how they cause so much pain, but and they can be bigger too. The thing is, if you talk to I talked to my OB about it too and just got some ultrasounds to confirm, she said, well, I can go in there and take them out for you, but you're just gonna make new ones. So why bother? But with seed cycling and bioidentical like hormone balancing, you can kind of prevent the problem in the first place. And so now I haven't had the issue since I did some bioidentical hormone stuff, because it's just trying to like level out those cycles a little bit more. And so I was a little more estrogen dominant at the time and not enough progesterone. And so anytime something's imbalanced, you're going to have an issue. It could be a headache, it could be sleep, it could be cysts, it could be, whatever. So, um, and then testosterone. So premenopause is kind of like we were talking about before we started the video here. That's just your regular monthly cycle, but that's when you're actively menstruating. Perimenopause, that can last, I don't know if you guys know this, but up to 10 or 12 years. So, and first time somebody told me that, I thought, are you kidding me? Like it just feels nice to just have it all, over with. But it's on a continuum, and so, I was saying before the video started, I think I had my biggest symptoms starting maybe at like 47, but looking back now, I'm thinking it was more like early 40s, and so I may not be done till 54. And so then postmenopause is when you haven't had a cycle for 12 months or longer. I talk to a lot of women too who I'll say, like, are you officially in menopause? And they have to define it, but they'll say, oh yeah, I haven't had a period in a while. I'm like, how long? Like, oh, 7 months. I'm like, well, actually I get a 12. And they're like, well, no, I'm not gonna. And then sometimes, like, especially after we start like a new diet stuff or some seed cycle, all of a sudden it's back, and people have mixed feelings about that. Some people are like, I actually feel better now that I'm cycling again. And other people are like, what? I thought this was gone. So sometimes just when you think it's over, it's not, but it's not abnormal. And so, like I said, I like to tell women too, there's nothing wrong with you. It's part of that like transition, but the symptoms can be very difficult. And so just making sure the things that you do even ahead of time. So I love meeting with women in their 30s or even early 40s, because you can start seed cycling and do a lot of this stuff ahead of time. And then once you hit that transition, it'll be easier because you'll be balanced like heading into it. Food too, like food is huge for that. And so, okay, so some classic symptoms. Changes in your cycle, longer, shorter, heavier, lighter, skip a cycle, have 2 in a month, all of that. Just something's like not regular. Hot flashes and night sweats. Sleep disturbances, so that could be having a hard time falling asleep, staying asleep, or getting up before you, all of a sudden you're up at like 4:30. Mood changes. Even if you have never been diagnosed with depression and anxiety before, all of a sudden you're like, oh, what's this? Like, this is new. I don't feel so great. At one point, about a couple years ago, I ran a neural panel on myself because I felt like very low, which was not typical for me. And so it's a urine test I do with women, both in my nutrition and mental health practice. I like to do it before we look at meds, though. And so sure enough, my serotonin was pretty low. And so I didn't, start on meds or anything, but I decided to do 5-HTP, which I use a lot. So that has tryptophan in it. So that's like what's in turkey that makes everybody sleepy. 5-HTP is a precursor to build more serotonin. So if you take it at night, it'll help you sleep. And then during the night, it's building more serotonin. So then it increases your cortisol awakening response in the morning, where you wake up and you feel like getting out of bed and doing the things. Not overnight, but like I just ran mine again like 2 years later, and it was fabulous, and I felt better, and so I knew it was working. Now I actually don't even have to take it every day. Now I just take it like a couple times a week. It does make me actually wake up a little bit earlier, which, depending on who you are, if you don't want that, and it may not happen to you, but to me it did. However, when we were just traveling in Seattle, there was 2 mornings that we had to be up early, and so I took it the night before. A, because I knew it would get me to bed, and B, I knew it would wake me up a little more refreshed. If I knew I could sleep in, or I wanted to sleep in, then I wouldn't take it. But that's something I found out that's like been an interesting sort of side effect, which can be a pro or a con depending on what time you're normally up. Low libido, vaginal dryness, poor sexual response, brain fog. I noticed that too. That was new for me. I couldn't think of the name of things. Like, people would like hold stuff up, and I'm like, or like we came home, yesterday we were pulling the driveway and our garbage cans were out, and I wanted to tell my son to like take the garbage cans down, and I was like, Owen, can you move that blue thingy? He was like, the garbage? I'm like, yeah, that. So it was funny, we ended up like sitting in the car, and I ended up talking to my son about like menopause a little bit, because he is doing some landscaping for some older people in our neighborhood, and he's always coming home talking about how they share the same stories over and over again every day. And he's there, and they're like, oh, she's talking about the cicadas again, or she's talking about, whatever. And I'm like, well, let me explain to you. Like I said, that's drop in estrogen. He goes, what? I said, well, what did you learn in health class about all this stuff? And he said, well, we didn't talk about that. So then I was just explaining, like, when I can't think of the name of this stuff, he goes, all right, I'll know that's a low estrogen day for you, or whatever. But for sure, like that's where some of that. So those are like the classic big ones. However, skin changes, dryness, acne. I had that all of a sudden too, like a handful of years ago. Cystic. That's because my estrogen was too high. We always assume it's testosterone, but a lot of times it's estrogen dominance. UTIs is connected with vaginal dryness. So if your vaginal wall is thinning and it's drier, it's going to be easier for bacteria to attach there. And so there's lots of things we can do with that too. Some people say, I haven't had this, but some people will say like muscle fatigue and like more aches and pains all of a sudden.
My feet.
Yeah, feet and hands a lot of times. It can be like hips and shoulders or lack of endurance. I've noticed that a little bit too, just working out at the gym. I'm kind of like taking a lot longer breaks in between sets than I used to. So a lot of times the joint pain, that's from lower estrogen. So that can be from that dropping. Chest palpitations, where people all of a sudden feel like they're having panic attacks. But that's not what it is. Chest palpitations are a form of actually hot flashes or night sweats. It's just you don't have the sweating part, you're not hot, but it's in that same realm. But I think the first thing we think of is like, I need an EKG, I'm having a heart attack, because if you haven't had that before, it's not a great feeling. Once you know what it is, then you can kind of let it roll. I had a little bit of that too. I would call mine like, it was like fluttery kind of. And I'm like, what's going on? And then I'm like, am I anxious? Am I, no, I feel fine. It was just coming out of nowhere. And so, but once you know what it is, then we can look at that too. Weight distribution. It might not necessarily even be weight gain, but like where it's sitting, like usually right below, like lower belly, sometimes kind of midsection. Your cholesterol might increase. That's a whole nother talk for next year. Your total cholesterol at times may increase. The other numbers a lot of times aren't as affected, and I am not at all concerned with total cholesterol numbers. Like I said, that's another talk for 2025. So if it goes up, it goes up. But just know that it might not be anything you're eating or doing. It could be just hormonal changes. Even when we do hormone replacement therapy, sometimes that affects cholesterol. So just something to kind of know. Eye changes, I had that about 2 years ago. Everybody brings me these tiny little supplement bottles when they come of like things they're taking, and I was like, whoa, all of a sudden I couldn't read that. Now they're like little. Everything else wasn't an issue, but my eyes, and so they still are, my eyes are dry and like tired, almost like fatigue. And so I went and got like an eye exam, and I still have 20/20 vision, but I just got some readers anyways, just to kind of see, but it's that focus piece. And so that's kind of age related too. But yeah, eye changes. Even sometimes people will say receding gums or like sore gums. I just started having that this last year too. I never had to use like sensitive toothpaste or do anything like that. Just kind of all of a sudden, my last dental exam, I was like, whoa, that hurts. Like you're not gonna be able to, you can't do that, And so just a little bit of recession, and some of that comes with age too. So a couple of things that can help, and as we go through some of this stuff, it's really not that much different than I would tell the general population. There's some specific things, but that's why I say if you can get yourself together, ideally in your 30s or early 40s, then some of this might be a cakewalk for you because you are already kind of a little bit more balanced. Whole food diet, I would say that for almost anything, but there's no difference here. Primarily your lean proteins, fruits, vegetables, even root vegetables, potatoes, things like that. Weight bearing exercise. Walking is great, but if you were to add something in addition to that, I would have you lift weights or do yoga way over standing on a Stairmaster for an hour. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's not going to build as much like muscle tissue. And so if you were to pick one exercise to do, like I said, in addition to walking, because I think that's great for anything, I would have women like lifting weights as much as possible. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to, bench 400 pounds or anything, but just some kind of weightlifting 3-4 days a week Sometimes I suggest people do that and then more formal, and then maybe there are other days they're walking or doing yoga. Like I would rather have you do that because you also don't necessarily want to jump into all these crazy HIIT workouts and do all that as you're going through this transition because you're gonna have less energy. And so I used to do spin class, kettlebell. I don't do any of that anymore. And it was hard to let go of, but yet you have to listen to your body. And then I picked up yoga, aerial silks, some other things, and then really concentrated on weightlifting and put on a lot more muscle actually in my 40s. So um, um, address any other underlying issues that might be connected with hormones. So thyroid is hormone, and so addressing some of those, cortisol stuff, vitamin D, talk about vitamin D every time, but getting your vitamin D up will improve your sleep. That'll give you some more energy. Um, I don't know how many people have tested vitamin D on, hundreds. And I think there's been 3 people that I've seen that had adequate vitamin D, and probably because they're already taking it. So pretty much if you live in Wisconsin, or I'm going to say Seattle after being there because it's kind of gloomy, you're going to need a vitamin D supplement, and probably way more than you see on the shelves at Target or whatever. So I'd say a moderate dose for most people is about 5,000 IUs.
I was taking 1,000 or 2,500 for years.
Yeah.
And I recently had my D tested and it was
What was it?
30.
Oh yeah, yeah. So for 30, what I would do is actually 10,000 for 3 months, hit it heavy, and then retest, and then you probably back down to 5. But 5 is a good middle of the road for the rest of your life dose, probably.
I went up to 5
for most
and
people.
I thought that was high.
Yeah, no, 10 is, yeah. When we do clinical dosing, it's about 70,000 a week, 50 to 70,000 a week, and you want D3, not D2. So D3 with K2, and that'll help it absorb. Because that's the other thing. If you're taking 1 or 2,000 and you're taking D2, or you're taking D3 but it doesn't have the K2 in it, it just kind of runs right through you. And so anything you're going to put in your mouth, you want to absorb the best you can. If you have gut issues, digestion issues, that makes everything harder to absorb too. So
I think I was at 64 when I had mine tested.
so that's decent. So are you taking it now, or?
I always take it, but I don't take it every day, probably like every other day.
And how much, do you know how much is in yours?
It's the D3K2. I got it from our chiropractor office. That does some holistic stuff too.
So then, however much that is, however much you're taking, I would just keep doing what you're doing, or you can. Yeah. It was interesting to me because, and I just finished with a pretty massive gut infection, actually like a month or so ago, H. pylori, so I had to treat that myself. It was awful. It was, I 10 out of 10, did not recommend it. But it's interesting because I had my vitamin D tested during that time and it went down. And that's why. And here we're in the middle of summer and it went down. I thought, what? I always try to keep mine between 70 and 100. And I test mine every December around the holidays, just in the middle of winter to get my low. And it was like 66 or something. I'm like, perfect. That's my winter number. I'm going to keep supplementing. And then during the summer, what I typically had done is if I was out in the sun that day, I skipped my supplement. And if I wasn't, then I would take the 5,000. So then about a month ago, I had it tested for something else I was doing. Oh, for the pellets. And it was 51. And I thought, what? It's the middle of summer. Like, why is that? And I was so now I'm back to just taking it every day now. But it's probably because I had that bacterial infection. And so everything was a mess. And so it just wasn't absorbing the same. And so your gut health is totally connected with how well your supplements absorb and the hormone stuff too. So, I mean, the gut's if I were to start one place in the human body, that's where I start with people. So, bioidentical, I'm not going to go into a lot of the details on bioidentical hormone replacement, but we'll cover a little bit today, but so that can help for sure. Some herbs and supplements, we'll talk about those today. Acupuncture. I've had a lot of clients do acupuncture with some great, and chiropractor, but acupuncture in particular for hormone stuff and hormone balancing. Mo at the Siloam Center, like a mile from me downtown, is really great. Allison Becker in Evansville is fabulous too for that. Sleep hygiene. What I mean by that is, are you on your phone the hour before you go to bed? Is your room cool, dark, quiet? Like, are you, do you have music, do you have lavender? How are you setting yourself up for that nighttime ritual? And maybe you didn't need that before. And when you were 25, you would just be like, I'm tired, I'm gonna go to bed. And then you lay down and you go to bed. but maybe can't do that anymore. And so again, just setting yourself up for success as far as sleep goes. And maybe you need something in addition to that, but that's a good start at least, and that's good for the rest of your life. Like, you need to be doing that. We all need to be doing that. So chiropractic, acupuncture, craniosacral therapy. We have a practitioner right in town here too that does that, Tammy Goldstein. I see her for my TMJ, for my jaw, but that could be great too. So any of those, the body work, lymphatic massage, all that stuff's pretty underrated, honestly. The first thing I usually see with women when we look at hormones is decrease in progesterone before anything else. That's usually the first one to kick it. And then that's when you're, edgy, sleep problems, change in cycles. That can even be connected with like hot flashes too. So, and then we see a lot of times decrease in estrogen, and then a rise in the luteinizing hormone and the FSH. And then at some point during there, decrease in testosterone too. But again, we don't talk about that very much. That can even come first too. It just depends on who you are. There's genetics in play and some of that stuff too. So once your FSH, so a good telltale sign for whether or not you're in full menopause is once your FSH hits 25, then we usually consider you menopausal. That, and you haven't had a cycle for 12 months. But sometimes people are like, am I in full menopause or peri? Last time I had my checked, I was 18, which means I'm kind of like heading that direction, but not quite there, which I would say is how my symptoms align also. I'll shoot out just a couple numbers for you guys. Some of the ranges like vary a little bit, but like FSH 25 plus is, so that's usually like menopausal. So somewhere, anything kind of under that means you're in process. Luteinizing hormone 16 is kind of that magic number for when usually that's full, like menopausal. Has anybody ever had their cortisol, like a saliva cortisol test? Have you ever done that? Like a 4-point test, not just one in the morning? Morning is okay, but a lot of times when people can't sleep, it's cortisol. And then cortisol drives testosterone and some of those other hormones too. 4-point cortisol, I usually do one at least once a year now, but is right when you wake up, it's just a saliva test, like spit in a tube. Right when you wake up, you do one, and then one at like 1 or 2 in the afternoon when a lot of people, their energy starts to dip a little bit, and then 5, 6 at night, and then usually right before you go to bed. Not when you get into bed, but right before you want to sleep, theoretically. But a lot of times what I see is a spike in cortisol in the evening from people who report that they can't sleep is because their cortisol is high. So there's lots of things we can do for that too. You can do ashwagandha, you can do there's a Integrative Therapeutics has a good supplement, it's just called Cortisol Manager. I take it before I go to bed, and I take it about like an hour before I go to bed. It just like, it's like a nice brain dump, and it just kicks your system down. Cortisol Manager. I like it because there's ashwagandha, berberine, there's a couple things in it, but it's like all in one, and I don't have to take 9 things. I've had a lot of success with that with people. I use that pretty regularly. You can take it during the day if you want to. It makes me a little sleepy during the day, so I take it at night. You can take 2 or 1, and I can hook you up with any of that stuff if you want to. I like to test and not guess as far as like blood chemistry and lab stuff, so I don't like to generally use that until I've tested it. However, there's not a ton of risk in trying it for a month and see what happens. But yeah, I see that a lot, is that people's cortisol peaks right before they go to bed, or maybe at 6. And a lot of times it's like you're thinking about all the stuff you got to do the next day, or you're making a list or whatever, and so then your brain turns on. And so we want to turn the brain off, not on. But cortisol is huge with that.
What about Menobreeze? Have you heard of that supplement? Okay.
I'd have to look at like what's in it, because there's like a million names for things, but I like to look at like the concentration of what's in some of that stuff. What's the brand that you're using at chiropractor? Is it
For the vitamin D?
Yeah.
Gosh.
I can't see now. I can't think of it, because that brand is decent for other things.
Okay.
Menobreeze sounds like something on Amazon or Target, but I can't think of like. It depends on what's in it.
There. Yeah, my girlfriend, her naturopath
Recommended it. I haven't heard of that one.
Okay.
No. Okay. Couple symptoms and maybe where they were coming from. Let's talk through those. Insulin resistance. So that can be then that you're noticing weight gain or like blood sugar dysregulation or the weight gain in the center. That is a lot of times connected with low estrogen. I want to clarify too, like when I had my estrogen tested, it was within range on the lower side, but I still was estrogen dominant, if that makes any sense to you. So my estrogen was low, so I was having symptoms of low estrogen, not a ton, but some. But I was having more symptoms of low progesterone because my estrogen was here and my progesterone was here instead of like this. So it is all like balance and like patterns and stuff. And if people are within range or even outside of range and they're not having a lot of symptoms, we just leave it alone. And so getting that test run is like a good, and then connecting it with your clinical interview is a good place to go. Night sweats are a lot of times fluctuating estrogen, because if you're going through perimenopause, that's what it's doing. It's like all over the place, and low progesterone. When I started the bioidentical progesterone cream and a little oral, all my night sweats went away. I am still warm when I sleep, based on the story I told you guys earlier, but I'm not, none of that is happening, and no chest palpitations anymore either. So, if your diet is wonky and it's carb heavy or processed food heavy and your estrogen's dipping and then you have insulin resistance, then that's where you're going to gain weight in the middle for sure. That's all going to like hit right there. Lack of energy, a lot of times low progesterone or low testosterone also. Testosterone is connected with how you feel pain, energy, endurance, sleep, all those things. We think of like the libido piece, but there's lots of other stuff that goes in with that. Lack of sleep for sure is low progesterone, almost always. So, but again, it's the balance of all these things too. So that's why it's good to look at ranges, and it's good to almost like run that stuff even twice a year, depending on where you're at, maybe twice a year or whatever, just to see kind of what your pattern is. Like, is it slowly going down or up, or what's it doing? Some basic, without like working individually with you or prescribing things, some basic suggestions for perimenopause and menopausal women. Vitamin D, we already talked about that. Do you have that one here? No, but we can, that's easy. So D3 with K2, probably 5,000 IUs. If you have never had your vitamin D tested, go do it. It's easy to do. 70 to 100 is your sweet spot. The normal range in the doctor's office will be 30 to 100, but 70 to 100 is where you're going to feel best. You will not feel good at, 30, 40. That's super interesting to me that yours was low, but maybe you just weren't taking out. Because I was like, so that's an example. You're outside all the time.
And I hike a lot.
You are outside a ton and hike.
A lot of sunscreen and
Yep.
hats.
Yep. But you like genetically, you just might not absorb it super well. My mom, for example, hers was, I tested like my mom and her husband recently, and of course then they went and got a test, and my mom's was like 42, and she's like, oh, mine's good. I'm like, that's like a triggering word for me. I'm like, good. No, what's your number? She goes 42. I'm like, mom, that's not that great. So we did 10,000 for her, and in 3 months hers got up to 84, and now we backed off and she's done. So like her absorption was amazing. Is she 80?
You take magnesium, like I take magnesium at night and my D3 in the morning, because
Yep.
then
that's what I would do.
More
Yep.
of the D3.
Yep. K2 is really the numero uno one. And I like to find ones, the D3 and K2, again, as much as you can find, unless there's a reason not to, of it all together. I mean, it's like seriously the size of a birth control pill. They're tiny. Magnesium glycinate I take at night too for sleep. And most of us all of us should probably take magnesium glycinate. It's good for everything. But we don't really need to take much besides, and it's a fat soluble, but like whatever. I tell people like, do I take this with food? Do I not? How do I, whatever, just take it, and whenever you can remember, because if you got to remember all those things throughout the day, you're not gonna do it. So just, I try to give people like, here's some AM stuff and here's some PM stuff. Maybe a digestive enzyme before meals, throw it in your lunch bag, but like just keep it simple, or you're not gonna be able to. Nobody wants to wake up to 28 supplements and try to remember and put them in the little, I got them in my little pill thing now. So
I take them as soon as my coffee's done, because I just
Perfect.
have my creamer in my coffee.
Yep.
So then I'm like, oh no, fat soluble vitamins are good to go.
Yeah, right. Except for, I think I've told you this stories before, the multivitamin that I use for people is pretty like, it's medical grade. It's, it's like a kid butt vitamin. If you take that with hot coffee, you will have niacin flushing. Like I get hives and the whole 9 yards for like 10 minutes. So I tell people not to take anything with a B vitamin, not to take with a hot beverage because, I didn't know, this is probably 10 years ago, I noticed it when I switched to more medical grade stuff. I just popped two, and all I had was my coffee with collagen in the morning. I'm like, good grief. Now am I, like now I'm allergic. I'm having because I was having histamine issues at the time. I'm like, oh, I'm probably allergic to collagen now. But I remember taking like some of my son's like Zyrtec quick because it felt like, I remember like looking in the bathroom mirror and it was like blotches all over. I jumped in our pool. It was like a Sunday morning. I literally just jumped in the pool because I was like itchy, like inside of my ears. And I thought my scalp, I was just like, what's going on? Now, the first few times that happened, I didn't catch what it was. So here I was taking, like, downing Zyrtec, and then it would go away in like 10, 15 minutes. I'm like, oh, that must be what it is. It must be a histamine thing. I better get to the bottom of this. But then one day it hit me. I'm like, wait a second. This is just niacin flushing, which is totally harmless. It just doesn't feel great. So I still get it once in a while. And probably only about 20% of the population has that reaction. So you're likely that you don't. But I make sure that I take 2 multivitamins in the morning, but I make sure I either take it with food. I generally don't take it on an empty stomach too, because some of the medical grade vitamins can make you just like low grade nauseous, right? And so everybody's a little bit different. But if you feel great doing it, then. But yeah, coffee and hot beverages, not just coffee, will sort of speed up the metabolism of those vitamins, and it just hits you harder then, So you never had niacin, you must not have.
Actually, not. Yeah, that actually really resonated. I think it's happening every day, actually.
Really? Are you getting like kind of tingly and like?
About the time I go up to get dressed.
Yes, yes.
Like
That's about how long it
after.
takes. That's exactly what's happening. And if it
always
doesn't
hot,
bother you,
and
don't worry about it. Yes,
so
that's what it
hot in
is.
here, and then I get flustered and I hate all my clothes.
Yes, right. And you're sweaty and sticky. Yeah.
But
It's just niacin flushing, probably. So sometimes it's nice to have those aha moments. You're like, oh.
I actually thought it was the coffee, and I was like, I'm not gonna be that. So.
Yeah, right. But
I
noticed a difference. So like I like cold brew like year round, but definitely in the summer I do. But I wasn't. If I on an empty stomach would take them with cold brew, I didn't have the issue as much. So, but I do try to still take it with food. So I actually don't end up taking my multi and some of my vitamins until later in the day because I fast in the morning. So I don't really eat till like 11 or 12, and I just wait till then, which is fine. And then the extra B vitamins helps me kind of get through the afternoon anyways. So, but yeah, just a couple tips on that for sure. So vitamin D with K, number 1. Fish oil, omega, that's a great anti-inflammatory for anyone. That's an omega-3. Nordic Naturals is, did you bring that one? Nordic Naturals is probably my favorite. We have that here at Basics. You can do liquid, gel caps, whatever. Also, if your HDL and your lipid panel is below 50, you definitely want to get on a fish oil. You should just do it anyways. It's great for joint pain. It's great for brain fog too, because fish oil is sort of like a natural baby aspirin, essentially. If you are having a procedure or anything where they don't want your blood thin, don't take it for a few days before you go, just because it will it's a natural blood thinner. People use it for headaches too, natural blood thinner, like as opposed to an ibuprofen or aspirin. But every day, every day I would have you take that anyways. Magnesium glycinate we just talked about at night. How much I'm going to tell you is probably way more than what many of you take, but at least 500 milligrams I would say before bed. 1,000 is even better. So it depends on what the rest of your diet is. If you're eating a mostly whole foods diet, you're sleeping okay. 500 is a great like baseline for everyone. 1,000 if you're having issues sleeping or you were eating kind of a standard American diet. That one's pretty cheap. And then B complex in particular. Now, not everybody needs to do this, but Integrated Therapeutics makes a good B complex. You guys have a good one here too. I only take a half dose of it, and I actually take my 2 multivitamins late morning, and I take my B around 1 or 2, before maybe I might start to have that dip. And also, I tend to work later into the evening, and so I need a little bit more energy for that. B vitamins are water soluble. So when you go to the bathroom and it's like canary yellow, that's your B vitamins, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just, that's what's happening. They're getting excreted out. But all the B vitamins serve as cofactors in the production of estrogen. So especially if your estrogen's low, B vitamins are good for that. And I like a complex. We all talk about B12 all the time, but B6, 5, like all those in there are good. Remember though that there's probably niacin in that one too. So I usually don't take my multi and my B together. In fact, if you ever were to sit in the front seat of my car, you're going to see a little cup of vitamins that I end up driving around with because I kind of spread mine out as I drive. And I think because of my chronic health history, at one point I was taking a lot of supplements, and so I kind of have like not really a full gag reflex after treating H. pylori. I did, and so I don't want to I don't know. Some people just like throw them down in the morning. I really don't want to do that. I just take a couple at a time, and like I try to do the fish oil, which is kind of big, and I put that with like one of the smaller ones. I take DIM, and so kind of the first part of the day, it doesn't stress me out as much to just kind of like take a couple and then dry for a little bit, and then whatever. But I usually take my B vitamin separate than my multi, just because there's a lot of niacin in there. So now we know Amber's having niacin flushing every morning.
This makes so much sense.
It is, yeah.
I've experienced that too, and but I also have histamine intolerances, so.
It feels like that.
Broth and like,
Yep. So I
um,
can't handle, I don't have histamine allergy issues, but I have histamine gut issues. I tend to produce the bacteria that's high histamine. And so bone broth can be an issue for me. Anything fermented, like things like that, you just can't, to a point. Like I do really well with like the tuna salad here and some of the other stuff, but like, yeah. And Ancient Nutrition is my favorite protein powder, which is the bone broth. I just have to tread lightly on the amount of that, because it'll hit me, like I'll just feel funny or I get bloated or whatever. 9 times out of 10, it's like a great choice for people unless you have histamine issues. Estrogen dominance is connected with histamine issues, by the way, too. So that's how I found that out too, is that it was about 2 years ago when I did the neuro test on myself when I was feeling awful. That's what it was. So my SIBO had returned, my bacterial overgrowth, my estrogen was high, and then that was also causing like high histamine. And it turns out a little bit of depression because, oh my gosh, like dealing with all that. Because every day I would just wake up and I felt awful, and I'm like, what is it? Turns out it was all those things, and none of them play well together, and they were all feeding off each other. So then I just kind of had to treat. Once I treated my SIBO and then I got on progesterone, then it leveled out my estrogen, and then my histamine intolerance pretty much went away. I still tread lightly on those foods, but other than that, I did a low histamine diet for a while. Other than that, now I'm fine. So in a few months it was fine, but it did take a few months though to really like look at that stuff. But if you can dig down and look at the root cause of some of this stuff and not just treat the symptom, then sometimes you can alleviate your initial symptom and then the 9 things that went along with it that you really haven't put together. Okay, then those are the basic ones that I have like suggest for almost everybody. Additional, more specific perimenopause supplements. Black cohosh for sure. That's for the night sweats. Usually between like 20 and 80. I want to see what this one is. This one's
There are several.
15 milligrams. Okay, in one capsule. So you could take 1 or you could take 4 or 5, and there's other ones out there, but like this is a good basic one. You can take it during the day if you're having issues during the day too, like in the morning. Most people, a lot of times when it starts, it's just at night. So again, you would take this with your magnesium an hour before you go to bed. Start at maybe 20, or like if I was taking this one, I'd take 2 of them, like 30, and then just see what happens. And the only thing with this is that you never know when you're going to have one, and so it's not really, you can't take it like after you've had one. Like it's got to be ahead of time. And so if you're having them on the regular, just take it every night. And this one's really inexpensive too, I believe too. I don't remember how much it is. It's not much. So chasteberry, which often is called like Vitex, that balances specifically your estrogen and your progesterone. I was on that for a while too, but my estrogen, again, wasn't high, but higher than my progesterone. That one we use too. That'll improve mood and fatigue by balancing those 2 hormones in particular. Ashwagandha, I talked about that when I talked about the cortisol management. That's one of the primary ingredients. You can just take plain ashwagandha if you want to too. Note about ashwagandha, if you have an autoimmune disease, sometimes that can trigger, it'll trigger your immune system a little bit. Most people I've worked with haven't had an issue with it, but it is kind of on the list of like things to just be careful on. Helps with fatigue. That's an adrenal nourisher, so that'll nourish your adrenals, and definitely take that at night because it'll relax you. We talked about insulin resistance before with the estrogen drop. Berberine I use for that. So berberine is one of the herbal remedies I use for when my bacterial overgrowth comes back, actually. And now I take 500 milligrams of berberine every day because that's how I can prevent my relapse from my gut infection. I usually can make it usually like once a year. I have to actually like treat it, but I can kind of get by just like kind of knocking those additional bacteria levels down with a little bit of berberine. I'd say for the estrogen piece, I would say more like 1,000 milligrams a day, which is usually 2 tablets. I like integrative therapeutics for that too, but a lot of times people, when I ask them, well, do you have digestive issues or IBS, and they're like, well, I never used to, and now I have that too. And so that is connected with an imbalance of progesterone and estrogen, especially during different times of your cycle. You might have just a little bit of everything, kind of symptom-wise. But after the age of 40, your digestive secretions and enzymes take a dive usually. And so digestive enzymes, 10 minutes before each meal, that's when I like throw in my lunch bag. That's helpful for lots of people. It helps you digest your food better, like will decrease the bloat. And because some people have put on weight in the middle, other people, I guess it was for me, like I had my body fat tested every 3 months. My body fat didn't change, but it looked like it did, but it was just bloating, like inflammation. So I feel like you could pop your abdomen with a balloon. So it may not actually be weight gain, but it can be that. So those are the 5 extra ones I would say are good in particular for perimenopause. I'm going to say the digestive enzymes, if you're having digestive issues and over the age of 40, I would pretty much take that too. Now brand has a really good digestive enzyme here. I know there's a whole bunch of different ones here, but the Now one's good. Yeah, it's like super enzymes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so then nutritionally, couple things that I see or a couple changes to make if you haven't already. Eating enough. Some people are eating too much for sure, but some women have been chronically dieting because maybe they started gaining some weight a handful of years ago, let's say in their 40s, and so they're doing Optavia or they're doing whatever, juice fast, cleanse, whatever. They're eating 900 calories a day and they're falling apart. Their hair's falling out, their skin's a mess. All of a sudden they have all these gut issues they didn't have before. And so chronic undereating and dieting can lead to a downregulation of all those hormones we talked about: estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. Do you know what else will kill your hormones? This would be like the opposite of probably what you've heard. If your cholesterol is too low. If your total cholesterol is under 150, then, and it depends on how you're eating, like if you're eating more vegetarian or vegan, it might be lower, but just know that if your total cholesterol is too low, you're not feeding your hormones well, testosterone in particular. So I see that with guys pretty often. They'll be like, oh, my doctor said my cholesterol is great, and I'm kind of like, well, it's not high, but it's like maybe not high enough actually. You got it. Cholesterol, we gotta have enough cholesterol for our hormonal functions, brain activity. It's good. We want some cholesterol. Your total cholesterol and your LDLs really don't matter too much. Your triglycerides, which is your inflammatory one, and your HDLs, those are the ones I'm going to look at, and I'm going to look at the ratio between those. We want your HDLs as high as possible and your triglycerides as low. But if you have, especially if you have low total cholesterol and high triglycerides, that's not great because that means you don't have enough hormones to produce enough cholesterol to produce your sex hormones, and you're having an inflammatory response. Like you're probably not eating great because your triglycerides are up. But eating enough, if you put too much stress on your body by dieting, that will also rob your cortisol, and then that will crash too. And just, all these systems are connected. Obviously, over-consuming food can lead to inflammation, blood sugar regulation issues, and weight gain, and mood disorders, and all this stuff too. But I don't want to talk about just that. It's like either end of the spectrum is not great. So increasing foods with omega-3s, which is like the fish oil, and 6s, but in the form of seeds, in my opinion, if you do seeds. Omega-3s would be like, I know not everybody likes this stuff, but like sardines, salmon, walnuts, extra virgin olive oil, flaxseed, chia seeds, things like that. I would also say, in my opinion, even though I do mostly whole foods diet, I think soy gets a bad rep. And so most of the research has been, is not really connected with issues with hormones with soy with some exceptions for breast cancer and some other things, but you really have to eat like a lot of it. Also, just like everything, the type and the form matters. So I don't regularly put soy like in my meal plans for people, but like here and there, when I'm working on a low FODMAP meal plan, or maybe somebody that's vegetarian as long as they don't have autoimmune, like I might put like some roasted soy nuts. I'm not talking soy in some soy isolate or any of the processed forms. I'm talking about like organic extra firm tofu, which we have here, or organic roasted like edamame soy nuts, which we have here too. So the more natural, or like steamed edamame, like the more natural forms of that. Especially if your estrogen's taking a diet, it actually can be helpful, like to support that. So some people have like reactions to sort of soy allergies, so then don't. But omega-6s, which most of us get too much omega-6 and not 3. So if I were to pick one, I'd have you get your 3 up and not your 6. But the 6, a lot of times, the poor form of 6 comes from our standard American diet. But the good 6s come from coconut, pistachios, pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, and evening primrose oil. So that's a good way to get 6s up too. Fiber. More isn't always better, especially if you have GI stuff, but a lot of this stuff, all the seeds like flaxseed, stuff like that can be good. My favorite fiber that's non-bloating, because I've taken it for years, is PHGG, so partially hydrolyzed gar gum. We have it in the supplement section here. It's called Clear Fiber, and it's the Basics brand. You don't have to go take a fiber supplement if you have good, GI function. You're feeling okay. Don't feel like you don't want to like just add stuff for the hell of it. Like, I mean, just one thing at a time and connect it with things. You're not taking a whole bunch of stuff, but 5 grams of that stuff, and it's not. I actually, when I am treating my gut relapse with antibiotics, I take 5 to 10 grams of that fiber because it brings the bacteria out so I can nuke them. So, and it's low FODMAP. If you follow like a lower fermentation diet for like histamine, it's a good one. So, and there's psyllium and some other ones too, but our standard diets, and if you eat whole foods diet, you're probably good fiber-wise, but if you eat too much, if you're too high like carnivore and eating a lot of meat, you might not get the fiber though, so then that's where it'd be good to supplement too. Sometimes when people make a diet change, even for the better, sort of like overnight, like you're eating a certain way and then maybe start with my meal plans and the next day, your GI system might take a little bit to adjust. Not because you necessarily did something wrong, but it's a change. Your body's like, wait a second, we were used to all these things and now you're giving us something different, and so that sometimes with fiber can be helpful too. And then there's like seed cycling. So these are the 4 we use in seed cycling. And so if you've ever worked with a naturopath, these are in here too. I meant to bring my seed cycling handout, but I didn't. Pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, sesame, and flaxseed. There's 2 you mix in the follicular part of your cycle, day 1 to 14, and then 2 you mix, I can't remember the 2 you mix in the luteal phase, because one's trying to up your estrogen and one's trying to up your progesterone. So I did that for a while. However, I actually have a food sensitivity to sunflower seeds, and so I didn't know that until I did the seed cycling 20 years ago. And I remember telling my naturopath, like, I do not feel good. But it was only during that 2 weeks where I was doing the sunflower seeds. And then I'm like, wait a second. I looked up my food sensitivity test. I'm like, oh, yeah, I can't do the sunflower seeds. So then I just did pumpkin, I believe. I think it's pumpkin and flax together in the first part of the cycle. And then I believe it's sesame and sunflower in the luteal phase. I'd have to remember. But and sesame seeds are, tiny, but it's a tablespoon of each too. Now you don't have to eat it plain. I think all these taste great plain, so I could care. But you could put on a salad, or people do like oatmeal or yogurt or, whatever. And so those are possibilities too. Here it is, sunflower and sesame. I was right. Yeah, so sunflower and sesame will increase progesterone, and then flax and pumpkin seeds increase estrogen. Alcohol. Yeah, probably don't drink as much of it, or any, actually. I'm not trying to be Debbie Downer. But if you have histamine intolerance, and as you enter perimenopause and menopause, your alcohol tolerance is just a lot of times changes majorly. So that was one of the other things I noticed about 2 years ago. When I tell people I don't drink, I mean like not at all. I love a glass of Cabernet or red wine. I never really drank a lot or I love one of the cocktails at Lark. But wow, after like 2 sips, I was like having this, what almost felt like nausea flushing, but I was having this like flush response, especially with red wine. Then I tried white, and I had less of a response here because histamines and white, but I don't like it as much. Like I like red. So we just recently converted this. Somebody had given us a little wine fridge when we built our house, and I literally just about 2 months ago took all of it out and we made it like a bubbly water LaCroix fridge, essentially on protein shakes. I'm like, we're not even using this. Like, what? Just put something else in here. And so, if you drink wine or you have a couple cocktails a week and you feel great, don't worry about it. But I just noticed my body was having like these immediate reactions. I noticed it, I think about 2 years ago, New Year's Eve, because that was one of the few times that maybe I would order something. I'd order one of these cool cocktails at Marilyn Houston's usually, like some lavender Hyundai something. I don't know. 2 drinks and I was just, I didn't feel good. I felt like just really like out of it and flush. And so now what I do, if we go somewhere and I want like to try a fancy drink, I just do a mocktail version of it. So I go on their menu, I say, this is what I want. Can you make it into a mocktail? And they can all do that, and it's fine. Then I can still enjoy the idea of not drinking plain water once in a while, and kind of making that you can make mocktails at home too. So, we talked about anti-inflammatory whole foods, trying not to diet too much. Eat like the right amount of food. If you're not sure what that is, working with me one-on-one is a good way to do that. I'm usually pretty good at taking a stab at macronutrients and calories. Let's talk about testosterone for a second then, or a minute. So low testosterone symptoms: low libido, decreased sexual response and function, decreased muscle mass and strength, endurance, difficulty concentrating in that brain fog. So that can be testosterone, that can be estrogen too. More aches and pains, thinning hair, hot flashes also, constipation, depression, lack of just drive. That's what I was noticing when I was explaining it to one of the guys that I work with when I refer to hormones, like I use him too, and I was like, I just don't have any like oomph, or I was feeling like it was just taking me a long time to talk myself into like doing the things that I used to do. I didn't feel depressed per se, I just kind of felt like blah. And so lack of drive, decision fatigue, that can be low testosterone too. Or maybe you were good at making decisions and now you're like, I don't know, do I want blueberries or strawberries? What would be better? I'm not sure. Just those stupid, just everyday decisions, all of a sudden you're just kind of caught up in. Overall fatigue. And then I say weight gain in the middle here for that too, like lack of. We see that with men. I don't know if you've noticed that, or you have significant others. They might not be overweight, but you'll notice that accumulation of belly fat kind of in the midsection. They could even be like skinny or underweight, but you notice the weight right there. That's low testosterone. Also, around the age of 50, you'll see like breast development with men who have low testosterone, and if their estrogen's too high. And so most guys don't want that, so that's a reason to kind of look into stuff. The talk on guys would be like 20 minutes, by the way, because it's usually, just the testosterone piece, although guys have estrogen too, but it's just much more simple. Ours I can be here 4 hours. So boosting testosterone naturally. So instead of if you're not going to do bioidentical hormone stuff, weightlifting. Back to weightlifting again. But don't overtrain. So I'm going to say not as much HIIT, kettlebell, crazy, like cycling classes, like less of that and more just like lifting weights, at a real moderate, pace, nothing where you're dying. But regular consumption of flax seeds is really good for increasing. How do I explain this? It increases estrogen, which you're thinking, well, what if I don't want that? But estrogen and testosterone are fairly connected too, so we want those to be balanced. Getting enough sleep. We don't talk about sleep as much. You probably think that if you were to ask me what would be the number one thing that I should do to feel better overall, knowing what I do for a living, you probably think it's food or nutrition, but actually I say sleep first. If you don't sleep well, everything goes to hell. Like you're gonna crave sugar, you'll be cranky, you're probably gonna have extra coffee, then you might have wine after that. Like we gotta get you sleeping better first. That's why I love the oral progesterone potentially. Okay, then the rest of it will kind of, potentially come in line. Alcohol's a mess for when your testosterone takes a dive too. So notice we didn't do free samples of wine today. We did seeds. The last thing I want to cover is just like a couple cravings. Like if you're having certain cravings, what it might be connected with. It can be like a million things. Chocolate, that is usually magnesium deficiency. There's so many people with magnesium deficiency. We just do not, even if you're eating a whole foods diet, like our soil is just not the same as it used to be, and magnesium is in there. And so that's why I love the magnesium glycinate, 500 milligrams to 1,000. If you're craving chocolate, like that's a good thing to just make sure you're high enough in. And eating more seeds, nuts, fruits, veggies. Sugar. Anybody crave just like a little bit of something sweet after dinner? I still do. But I wouldn't say I have like sugar cravings in general anymore. If I see it and it presents itself in front of me, then I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds good. But if I'm not around it, like not so much. I also find that like Bodacious has these great, I think Chad makes them actually down there, that, and you guys might have them too, the gluten-free chocolate brownies. They're so good. Once every couple months I will get one. I won't eat the whole thing. I think probably 10 years ago I could eat the whole thing, and now I'm kind of like, no, that's good. Like I just don't need as much of it, which is great then too. Because then if you want to indulge and stuff like that, you just don't have as much. It's not that big of a deal. I can make that brownie last 4 days, unless my kids get to it. I'm good. So sugar cravings are low chromium. One of the things we use at the doctor's office when we do medical guided weight loss, because they do that with some people, very few need it, but 200 milligrams of chromium a couple times a day is one of the supplements we use because it helps with impulses and sugar cravings, and that's like a big one for a lot of people. And you guys have it here too. Now has a good brand of that one too. If you have sugar cravings, that's a good thing to start. In fact, if you are like starting a meal plan with me and you normally crave sugar going into it, maybe just grabbing a little chromium on your way out might be a good idea. If you think that'll be a hard thing to adjust to. I will tell you that after doing a lower sugar diet, I don't mean sugar-free stuff, but like after not eating as much sweet stuff, seriously, in a few weeks, you won't crave it anymore. You know, you guys have probably heard of like the 28-day or 30-day like sugar detox. It really does work because it kind of resets you a little bit. I'm not really a proponent that you should never have any sweet things for the rest of your life. I don't really believe in that. But sometimes like going hardcore for a month is a good way to just reset.
I've had that too, and then even just like an apple tastes so much sweeter than
it does. Celery is actually a big one that I've heard people say. Like sweet potato. If you get rid of, and like I said, I'm not really loving like all the sugar-free stuff too, because you're still eating, you're eating something sweet. Maybe it's not caloric. Some of the artificial sweeteners will totally mess up your gut. So I say no go. I'd rather have like maple syrup or honey, or seriously just some sugar. Monk fruit I'm good with in moderation, and stevia too. Those are about the only two I think are great. But yeah, if you don't have it for a while, your actual taste buds will change. When I start meal plans with people, the biggest fear is like, I'm gonna crave cheese and bread and sugar. And I'll say, yeah, you might for a few weeks, because your body's detoxing. You might actually even be tired the first couple weeks. But then after that, as long as you stick with what you're doing, you really won't. And so if you're not thinking about chocolate 24/7 or wanting a pastry, you probably won't do it. Or it really won't look as good to you, because there's not mind over matter, but there's like a mental connection with like how you remember feeling when you ate those things. You will look at them differently. There's like somebody brings in Dunkin' Donuts or whatever, maybe you'd be like, oh, I can't wait to, and you'd like salivate when you saw them. After a while of like just kind of clean the house a little bit, you might just be like, eh. My favorite donut story, I can't remember if I told you this story the other day, but my favorite donut story that I have is that I couldn't remember the last time I had like a gluten-filled processed regular donut. I bet you it had been, I don't even know, 8 or 10 years maybe. It's just one of those things I just said I wasn't going to have. Now that Janesville Juice has their gluten-free vegan donuts, now, not at the farmer's market, but when they come back to Foster Avenue, I was getting a half of one every Saturday, and I felt great, and it was good, and whatever. But a few years ago, we're driving down Milton Avenue. I'm driving with my son, and he said, like, can we go to Dunkin', or I want a donut or whatever? And almost always like, no, like, no, we don't even do that. And I was like, okay, fine. I'm like, I'll get an iced coffee there, which iced coffee's not very good. So but we went through, and I said, Owen, what do you want? He said, I want a Long John, vanilla frosted Long John, I believe is what he got. I'm like, okay. And we're driving through, I'm kind of smelling it. I'm like, this smells kind of good. We drive through. I swear to God, the donut they gave me, they had just made. So it was like warm, and I got this like whiff, and I like passed it through the back seat, and I was like smelling it. I give it to him. We're pulling out, and I said, let me have a bite of that. He goes, what? Like, you don't eat this. I'm like, today I do. I want a bite. And I knew he would eat it fast. Like, before we even pulled out on Milne Avenue, it would be gone. Like, and so I'm like salivating in the front seat. So I take a bite. I'm like, whatever, it's a bite of a donut. I'm not going to die. So I take a bite. I start chewing it. And I had this anticipation that this is going to be this amazing deliciousness, and I'm not going to give it back to him. And you know what happened? I hated it. And I didn't know if I was mad or happy about that, because I haven't gone back since now, because it didn't taste like I remembered it tasting. So my taste bud had changed. It tastes like Windex. And then there was this like
Film.
Yes, film on the roof of my mouth, and I was like, icky. What is this? It's hydrogenated, oil probably, and corn syrup, and I don't know. But yeah, I was mad. So then I passed it back to him. He was like, I told you wouldn't like it, I'm like, but I just wanted to. I worked with a friend of mine for years around her Diet Coke addiction. 35 years she'd been driving through McDonald's drive-through getting a Diet Coke and a blueberry muffin, right, on the way to work. And so we had to work on her even taking a different way. And so I switched her over to cold brew at home, or even cold brew at McDonald's, instead of the Diet Coke. And at the time I really didn't have an issue with her having caffeine. I just wanted it to come from a little bit more natural place, and definitely skipped the muffin. So she had fibromyalgia. And so all of her symptoms went away actually once we did autoimmune diet. But that part was hard. So I said, what time do you go through McDonald's? And she said 8:15 every morning. I'm like, I'm gonna text you at 8:15 every morning for the first week, and just be like, don't do it, or you can do this. But again, we switched her over to cold brew kind of the week before too, and because I said, do you like cold brew? Do you like iced tea? Even a plain black iced tea? She's like, I like coffee. I like cold brew. I'm like, so she ended up getting a cool fancy thing she made at home, because you could do it cheaper too. And we added a splash of coconut cream and honey, and she was like, I love this. And so yeah, for I think it was maybe 6 months, 9 months, she didn't go, and she didn't crave it after a while. And so probably a couple weeks in, she was like, I don't even miss it. I really like this iced coffee, and whatever. And so then maybe we had our last session, and then 3 months later, I was talking to her out of the horse barn where my daughter is, because that's how I know her. And I said, how you doing? She said, good. I said, have you had a Diet Coke since? And she goes, ugh, no. And I'm like, I want you to go get one. And she said, no, I can't, because she was afraid she'd start that addiction cycle all over again. I said, no, I think you should just go get one and tell me what happens. And I didn't tell her, here's what I think will happen. I just said, I want you to go get one. And she's like, first of all, I think she said, you're nuts, but then she got it. And she texted me, she's like, this is awful. She spit it out her window, it didn't taste like she remembered anymore. But that's good. Yeah, sometimes I have people tell me a story of something that they do every day. Maybe it's a Diet Coke, maybe it's chocolate or whatever. And for her, it's seriously, it read like a steamy romance novel. She was like, first I pull up, and then drive through, and then I'm starting to salivate because I'm thinking about the Diet Coke, and then I pay for it, and then I touch it, and it's cold in my hands, and then the sound of the straw through it, and then ooh, the McDonald's ice is all crunchy and yummy. And then she was explaining what her body felt like with that first sip, pulling away, And I remember she just narrated all this, and I just kind of sat and listened. And then she stopped and she goes, wow, that sounds like I have a problem. And so sometimes it's hard to go all in, but once you take it out, then you won't miss it. You really won't. It's a ritual too. That's the other thing. I worked with another woman who was having work with a lot of women who drink a lot of wine. And so I'll say, well, how many standard drinks a week do you have? And she said, well, I have a couple glasses of wine at night. I'm like, okay. I think we normalize that as not being a big deal. I'm like, a standard glass of wine is, from alcohol measurements, it's 5 ounces. She goes, oh shit. And I said, you're having 2 glasses? I'm like, how big are your glasses? And I hold up, like I used to have a wine glass in my office. I hold up, I'm like, this is a 5-ounce glass. She's like, well, it's not that. Hers were 12. And so then she had 2 glasses, so that's 24. So how many drinks is that? 5. How many nights a week is she doing that? 7. What's 5 times 7? 35. Standard drinks for women to where it starts to impact her metabolism is 4 a week. So she was having 35. But when you explain it, it's just a couple glasses of wine at night with dinner. It's not that big of a deal. But her ritual, she had little kids, was after she put them to bed, she'd put on the fire, music was playing, Scrabble, or I don't remember, something, with a glass of wine. And so it sounds like not a big deal. But then when you think about it, she was also having a hard time losing weight. And so she was burning off that alcohol. You burn off alcohol first, by the way, before your French fries or whatever you have, fat and carbs, your energy sources. And so, yeah, then she was able to drop weight. But it was the ritual we decided for her, not the alcohol. And so we did 30 days no alcohol. She felt great, not as like sluggish. But then she was like, I really do miss wine. And I'm like, okay, we'll go have a glass. And so for her, it still tasted amazing. Because less of like a sugar thing, I don't think, for her. She was drinking like a dry red. And so then what we came up with is she ended up switching to hibiscus tea every night except for Friday. And then Friday night she had her 2 glasses of wine or whatever. And then she had hibiscus tea and did the same ritual and everything else the same. And then she just had wine on the Fridays. And wow, what a change. So you don't know until you try some of that. Sometimes it's helpful to have someone in your corner doing some of that stuff, but yeah. My June blog was on perimenopause on a lot of this stuff, probably a little more detail. In there, there's a link to and please send me a message if you're not sure like which one to take or what to do, but diagnostically, there's a couple options. ZRT does a saliva hormone panel. Follow the directions, because if you are regularly cycling, you got to take it 19, 20, or 21 of your cycle. If you're irregular, you follow the directions. It's in there. If you are menopausal and you want to take it, you still can. You just get to take it whenever the heck you want to. There's a cortisol add-on in there too. So there's ZRT3, which has the cortisol piece, which I think is the link I put in my blog, or ZRT1 is just the hormones. It's like an extra $70 to do the cortisol, 4-point cortisol, so I usually suggest people do that. If you are wanting to, see where you're at and get a baseline, and you don't have to do anything with it, by the way, but if you just want to see what's going on, because then we can do seeds and some of this other supplement stuff. If you are entertaining the idea of doing bioidentical hormone creams, the saliva panel is what you want, because that's the results that we need to be able to do that. If you are thinking you want to do estrogen patch or pellets, estrogen pellets, which kick in a little bit faster, they're a little bit more, I'm going to say invasive. I've had it, I would call it invasive, but I mean, you're sticking a pellet underneath your skin as opposed to just the creams. But some people are like, I don't want to do that every night. Then the practitioner I work with in Beloit that does that, he prefers blood. So there's another one on my website, and like I said, you can message me, that does cortisol, saliva, and then blood. Every practitioner is a little bit different. I had traditionally always used saliva. If you have an OB or a GP and you want to run a hormone panel, you can do blood that way too. We just gotta kind of attach the whether it's pellets or cream or whatever we're doing to either hormones, like either saliva or blood, not mix and match. So just kind of stick with one. The blood test I have on my website, or if you were to do it through an OB or something, you can get your LH and FSH too, because we don't get that through saliva, that's blood. So if you're wanting to know kind of where you're at, kind of in the menopause journey, that's a good way to look at that. So if you're going to get blood, then you want to do progesterone, estrogen, testosterone, free and total if you can, DHEA sulfate they'll call it, and then LH and FSH. And just know when in your cycle, if you are having them, you were, because the printout and the readouts will kind of, connect with that. If you were in follicular, luteal, what day of your cycle you were on. So follicular is 1 to 13 essentially. Again, everybody's cycle is different. Mine used to be 25 days, so I had a shorter second half. supposedly most people ovulate at 14. I was like 11, you know, so again, in there, ovulatory will be somewhere in the middle there, and then luteal is that second half of your cycle before then your period starts